If I were to ask you who the most iconic horror character ever is, what would you say? Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, or maybe even Pennywise the Clown? You got quite a few options there, right? But what if I were to ask you the same question again, only to now name the most iconic internet horror character instead?
My name is Jeff.
Well, the majority of you would most likely instantly think of only one of two characters, those being Freddy Fazbear or the main man of this video, the Slender Man. I don't think there's a single character who's had as much of an impact on internet horror as Slender Man had. And even after 15 years as of this video's release, he remains one of, if not the most recognizable horror characters the internet has ever created. Over the years, there has been no shortage of internet horror characters who managed to make a name for themselves. But in terms of mainstream relevancy, Slender Man easily stomps them all. If you use the internet at any point during the early to mid 2010s, it is almost impossible for you not to have come across him at one point. This guy was everywhere. Games, videos, memes, artwork, you name it. There was no getting around this guy. However, nowadays, apart from very few exceptions here and there, he's practically nowhere to be found. Aside from a remake of Slender the Arrival in 2023, the last relevant thing that was released for the franchise was the 2018 movie, and that was painful, to say the least. So how did this happen? How did a character that was once so popular end up fading into irrelevancy like this? Well, today, to celebrate Slendy's 15th birthday, I'd like to take you on a little journey through the history of the Slender Man, from his creation all the way to his downfall, to find out exactly why Slender Man faded into irrelevancy. The year is 2009, the first year of Obama's presidency, the year Justin Bieber released his first single, and the year Modern Warfare 2 was released, and most online gaming lobbies sounded something like this.
Idiot, you look like a loser right now. You're right.
Slender Man's story begins on a website called Something Awful, a comedy website and forum based around internet culture, more specifically parodying and making fun of internet culture. Every week, Something Awful would host a contest called Photoshop Friday, in which members were tasked with photoshopping images based around a specific theme or prompt that would be different every week. On June 8, 2009, one of these Photoshop threads was created, in which the goal was to create the best paranormal looking image. Going through some of the images posted on this thread, we can find quite a few submissions that are very well made, but also an equal amount that are, well, not so well made.
That is one big pile of shit.
Only 2 days after the thread was created, on June 10th, 2009, a user named Victor Surge posted 2 images, both of which came with a short story attached to them. This was the first image, and the caption read, "We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them. But his persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time. 1983, photographer unknown, presumed dead." And this was the second image, which was captioned, "One of 2 recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken the day which 14 children vanished, and for what is referred to as the Slender Man." Deformity cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence. 1986. Photographer Marie Thomas. Missing since June 13th, 1986. These 2 images mark the official birth of the Slender Man. And unbeknownst to Victor Surge at the time, he just changed the history of internet horror forever. Something Awful users absolutely loved the idea of the Slender Man, and for the next few days, Victor would continue posting new images of his creation, each of which added a bit of lore to the character. Many of Slender Man's main traits were already established in these first couple of images, like him mainly preying on children, his ability to sprout a bunch of tentacles from his back, him mainly roaming around dark forest areas, and his ability to mess with electrical equipment. With each new image that Victor posted, more and more users would start talking about the Slender Man, until eventually the original topic of a Photoshop contest was pretty much completely abandoned, and the whole thing turned into a Slender Man thread instead.
Look at me, sure. Look at me, sure. I'm the captain now.
On June 18th, 2009, a mere 8 days after Victor Surge posted his first 2 Slender Man images, a user named Cigars posted a short story in which he talked about his friend Alex. Alex had been working on his very first short film for the past 2 months, before abruptly abandoning the project for seemingly no reason and becoming incredibly distant and private, actively avoiding contact with other people. After a few weeks, Cigars, also known as Jay, managed to convince Alex to let him come over, and when he did, Alex looked sick, and Jay noticed that he had lost a significant amount of weight. After hanging out for a bit, Jay eventually asked Alex about the short film he was working on and why he suddenly decided to abandon the project. Alex didn't really give a reason, but said that he never wanted to see any of the footage he had filmed ever again, and that he planned on burning all the tapes that he had. After a bit of convincing, Jay eventually managed to get Alex to give him the tapes instead, under the condition that Jay never brought them up to him ever again, to which Jay agreed and brought the tapes home. Shortly after that, Alex moved to a different state, and Jay never heard from him ever again. He then posted a second message that included a link to a YouTube video, which is the video that's playing on screen right now. In this video, he basically explains the whole situation again, ending it off by saying that all of this happened 3 years ago, and that Jay had been reluctant to look at the tapes ever since Alex gave them to him. However, now, 3 years later, he has finally gathered up enough courage to look at the tapes and decides he will start uploading them to YouTube in parts. This was the start of one of the most popular YouTube series ever created, Marble Hornets. The series was written and directed by Troy Wagner and Joseph DeLodge, and both would also star as the main characters, with Troy playing the role of Jay and Joseph playing the role of Alex. It is absolutely insane to me how only 8 days after Slenderman's creation, there were already people dedicated enough to create a fully acted out video series for the character. And what's even more insane to me is how big the series became. The series ran for exactly 5 years, from June 20th, 2009 to June 20th, 2014, and would get a total of 3 seasons with a combined runtime of 9 hours and 22 minutes. Now, as you can imagine, with a runtime that long, I'd be here all day if I wanted to discuss everything that happened in the series. But to give you a brief summary, the series went on by continuing the story of Jay as he watches each of the tapes to try and find out what happened to Alex during the filming of his project. We quickly find out that during filming, Alex would start to frequently get stalked by the Slender Man, who in the Marble Hornets universe is called the Operator. This continuous stalking slowly causes Alex to become extremely paranoid, completely obsessed with the Operator, until practically his entire life revolved around proving the existence of and trying to capture footage of the Operator. After 2 months of doing this, in a final moment of clarity, Alex decides that he's had enough and abandons the entire project in an effort to save his sanity. This is when Alex turns the tapes over to Jay and moves to a different state. Jay then reveals that over the course of him uploading these tapes to YouTube, he's been doing his own research on the Operator for a while now, and has decided that he's going to continue the project where Alex left off. The series then goes on to follow Jay as he too slowly starts to become obsessed with the Operator, who now begins to haunt Jay as well. Again, I could fill the entire video by just talking about this series, but I'm not gonna do that. I highly recommend checking out the series for yourself if you're interested, as it's one of the most influential pieces of media ever created for the Slenderman character, and established a big part of the overall lore. Things like static appearing when trying to film him, and his ability to drive people insane and turn them into his own little minions called proxies, were all tropes that were first introduced in Marble Hornets. The YouTube channel that hosted the series has close to 120 million views as of me writing this, and the series would even go on to get an official DVD release and a tie-in movie. Though I use the term tie-in very loosely here, as the movie barely has anything to do with the original series it was based on. It kind of feels like the name Marble Hornets was just slapped onto it to get fans of the original series to watch it. But even when looking at it as its own standalone thing, it's just not very good. To be completely honest with you,
it's the biggest piece of dog shit.
But despite that, I cannot give the original series enough credit for being one of the biggest contributors to Slenderman's success. It laid the groundwork for nearly every other adaptation of the character that followed. And I don't think Slenderman would have ever achieved the mainstream success that he did if it wasn't for this series. However, the found footage style that the series was filmed in, and all of the ARG elements that were implemented into the storytelling, made it way too convoluted and difficult to follow for the average viewer. Of course, internet horror fans were all over this, but the average Joe wasn't gonna watch a video on YouTube and then go over to Twitter to read some cryptic clue, and then go back to YouTube again to a completely different channel that contained even more clues that were necessary if you wanted to understand the full story. Now, in order for Slenderman to reach a wider audience, it needed to be adapted into a different medium, something that would be a little easier to understand. Something like, I don't know, a video game maybe?
You suck. You suck.
Slender the 8 Pages. Originally just named Slender without the 8 pages subtitle, this game was revolutionary for not just indie horror games, but for the internet as a whole, which is very impressive considering how incredibly simple the game actually is. The game was released on June 26, 2012 by a studio called Parsec Productions. It only had one very simple goal, which would be made known to the player immediately upon starting the game: collect all 8 pages. When you load into the map, you find yourself in the middle of a dark forest with nothing but a flashlight in hand and your objective to find 8 pages. There's not even any music. All you can hear are crickets, the occasional owl, and the sound of your footsteps as you start looking for these pages, which you can find at various landmarks that are scattered across the map. If you follow the main path through the forest, it probably won't take you long to find your first page. These pages are made to look like the drawings Alex can be seen making of the operator in the Marble Hornets tapes. Upon collecting your first page, a low drum sound will start playing that sounds eerily similar to the Vine Boom sound effect. This is also when the Slender Man will start chasing you around the map. Slender Man will try to prevent you from collecting all the pages. You have to try and avoid him as much as possible. If you stare at him for too long, or if he gets too close to you, it's game over, as static covers your screen and one of the most recognizable sounds in indie horror history starts to play. After collecting the first page, Slenderman starts out a bit shy, doesn't really let his presence be known to the player. He only spawns behind you at first, just out of your line of sight, and hides behind trees and bushes. Chances are you won't even spot him until you're 2 to 3 pages into the game. However, with each page you collect, the music starts to get more and more tense, and Slenderman becomes more active and aggressive. No longer just stalking you from behind trees and bushes, but actively trying to catch you as he starts appearing right in front of you in an attempt to cut you off and block your path.
Why you bully me?
He also becomes more aggressive the longer you go on without collecting another page. So the faster you are at collecting the pages, the easier the game stays. And on top of that, your flashlight only has limited battery life and gradually gets more dim the longer you use it. You do have the option to turn the flashlight off to extend the battery life, but after exactly 15 minutes and 45 seconds of use, the flashlight dies, leaving you in complete darkness for the remainder of the game. Though if that happens, you're pretty much dead already, because you can barely see 5 feet in front of you without a flashlight, making it almost impossible to find any of the remaining pages without getting lost. But with enough trial and error and a little bit of persistence, it's definitely possible to beat the game. And what if you do? What if you manage to collect all 8 pages? Do you get to escape the forest? Or maybe an explanation as to why you were here in the first place? Does Slender Man give you free Robux? Nope, you still die. But you get to see the credits this time. And you unlock a daytime mode, where you can now play, well, during the day.
No shit.
But no matter what you do, the ending to the game will always remain the same. Slender Man will get you, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And that covers pretty much everything the original Slender game has to offer. It's extremely simple gameplay wise, and in terms of graphics, it's nothing special either. To be completely honest with you, it actually looks kinda bad, even for 2012 standards. Just look at the actual Slender Man model, for example. I mean, what the hell am I even looking at? The guy looks like a Q-tip dressed for a funeral. And what are those? He's wearing flippers.
What are those?
They are my
flippers.
Those are some Pingu looking ass feet, man. Also, some of the landmarks you can find the pages at are random as hell and don't really make any sense. Like this bathhouse, for example, that has absolutely nothing in it except for a chair.
Wow.
Or these random walls that are just there in the middle of a forest for seemingly no reason whatsoever. And the most random of them all, like honestly, what is the point of this tunnel? It leads absolutely nowhere. It's just on the middle of this path for no reason. Why would someone ever build this here? And why do I even care?
Wow, that's a great question.
Look, I just want to say that this is all in good fun. I really don't want to bash the game or anything because this is all in retrospect. At the time, this game was genuinely scary, and also many people's, myself included, first time ever playing a horror game.
Oh, hi, Mark.
And despite its simple gameplay and presentation, this game, which was originally just made for people who were already familiar with the Slender Man lore, became a giant hit, even with people who had never even heard of Slender Man before. And actually, I think hit is an understatement. This game became a phenomenon in every sense of the word, especially on YouTube. I cannot overstate the impact this game had on the Let's Play genre of YouTube. I mean, Let's Plays and indie horror games were already a thing on YouTube way before Slender came out. Amnesia and Ao Oni, for example, were very popular indie horror games many YouTubers played before that. But the release of Slender really was a turning point for the Let's Play genre. Things like the facecam, for example, really only started to become popular after the release of this game, because people wanted to see the person playing's reaction to the spooky Slender jump scare. Now, I'm not saying Slender invented that style of videos, but it most definitely popularized it. I mean, after Slender, pretty much every gaming YouTuber started using face cams for pretty much everything, and for the most part, that's still the standard today. But the main reason I say Slender was a turning point for the Let's Play genre is because I feel like before Slender, it was still kind of seen as weird to watch other people play games, at least by most people. But to me, the time around Slender's popularity kind of marks an overall social transition in a sense, at least when it comes to YouTube. YouTube was getting more and more popular each year and was slowly starting to become more mainstream. And watching and making gaming videos, and I guess YouTube videos in general, was starting to no longer be seen as a waste of time, but was instead starting to get seen as a normal hobby, and in some cases even an actual viable career choice. The Let's Play genre was already slowly on the rise because of this, and the massive success of Slender the 8 Pages gave the genre a massive popularity boost that introduced it to a more mainstream audience. And I genuinely don't think a game like Five Nights at Freddy's would have ever seen the success that it did if it wasn't for the success of Slender the 8 Pages, and the way it helped shape and popularize the Let's Play genre on YouTube. Now again, I'm not claiming that Slender is solely responsible for creating the Let's Play genre or the current Let's Play format, but it probably wouldn't be the way it is today if it wasn't for this game. The game also gave a huge boost to many YouTubers' careers, who would later go on to become household names, like PewDiePie for example, who got his first viral video from playing this game. And just as much of an impact as Slender had on the overall YouTube landscape, it had on the indie horror game landscape as well. I don't think there's a single game in history before the release of Slender that managed to spawn as many fan games and clones as this game did. I mean, I know the amount of fan games Five Nights at Freddy's got makes the amount that Slender did seem like child's play in comparison, but that was a few years after. This was really the first time in internet history where a game became so popular that so many fan games and parodies were created for it. Some of these fan games kind of served as updates or expansions to the base game, by keeping the gameplay and mechanics the exact same as the 8 Pages, but creating new maps for it. Sanatorium, Hospice, and Elementary, for example, were some of the most popular maps. But most of these games were just shitty, low-effort parody games that were borderline shitposts. Or in some cases, just literally shitposts. But there were some genuinely good ones that had some actual thought and effort put into them. Like Slendercraft, for example, which takes place in a recreation of the original 8 Pages map, but in a Minecraft style. And instead of a flashlight, you now start the game off with a torch and must collect crafting materials on top of the 8 Pages, which you can use to craft a flashlight and get rid of your torch. I think that's a very creative way to implement actual Minecraft mechanics into the game, and helps it stand out from other fan games that are usually really nothing more than glorified reskins. Another fan game that really stands out is of course Slendytubbies, a series to which I personally owe a lot, as the video of me playing through the series pretty much kickstarted my channel. What makes Slendytubbies so unique is that it isn't just a single game, but an entire series with its own lore and everything. While the first game in the series probably falls under the shitpost banner, the second game is actually really enjoyable. It has multiple maps to choose from, most of which have custom enemies of mutated Teletubbies. And the third game has an hour-long story mode campaign with boss fights and dialogue options, and it even has an online multiplayer mode. It's actually insane for a parody game. Slendytubbies is probably the most popular Slender parody out there, and I highly recommend checking it out for yourself if you haven't already. Anyway, a big reason as to why so many fan games were being made in such a short amount of time is of course because of how popular Slender the 8 Pages was on YouTube. Every gaming YouTuber at the time just kept cranking out video after video of just them playing these parody games, and everyone just kept watching them. It was easy money for them. And Slendy didn't limit himself to just gaming videos, oh no, he was literally everywhere. He started making appearances at Comic-Cons and on your mom's Facebook wall, in a bunch of clothing stores. There was no getting around this guy. People started dressing up as Slenderman, and all kinds of parody videos featuring the character were being made on the daily. Like seriously, anyone who sold white morph suits during that time could wipe their ass with $100 bills, because they were making big bucks. This really was the peak of Slenderman's popularity. Almost every day, new Slenderman related content was being released. Games, skits, song parodies, you name it. And it all happened because of one simple game. The developers of Slender the 8 Pages, Parsec Productions, were very quick to notice their game's rising popularity and began working on a sequel pretty much immediately after. The game was going to be a direct sequel to the 8 Pages and was going to have an actual story this time around. It was being developed in collaboration with Blue Isle Studios and the original creator of Slenderman himself, Victor Surge. This was going to be the first, and unbeknownst to anyone at the time also the last, big budget, full studio video game adaptation of Slenderman. And with the insane popularity of Slender the 8 Pages, and now even the original creator of Slenderman involved in the writing and production of the game, automatically making it an actual canon part of the Slender lore, this game just had the most perfect setup to become a massive, surefire hit. Only it wasn't. But before I actually start talking about this game, I feel like this is a perfect moment for me to clear something up first. At the beginning of my Slendytubbies video, one of the first things I said was this. There was this game that everyone played, then there was this game that no one played, and a lot of people took that as me saying that the game was bad, or that it was a giant flop or something, which it definitely wasn't, financially speaking. And I obviously didn't mean it literally when I said that no one played it. That was just me trying to be funny. But let's be honest here, Slender the Arrival didn't even come close to the popularity and the lasting impact that Slender the 8 Pages had, even though it had the most perfect setup to do just that, which is why I made that joke. Now, to be fair, while the game certainly has its flaws, which I'm definitely going to discuss in a minute here, this really isn't fully the developer's fault, as a lot of factors for why that happened were completely out of their control. But before I go into all that, let's take a look at the actual game first. Slender the Arrival released on March 26, 2013, exactly 9 months after the release of Slender the 8 Pages. Let's start by briefly going over the new story that was written especially for this game. Now, same as I did with Marble Hornets, I'm not going to go into too much detail as that would simply take too long. But if you want a more in-depth explanation of the story after this, I highly recommend this video by SuperHorrorBro, which I'll link in the description. I also quickly want to mention that I'll only be discussing the original version of the game from when it was first released, and not any of the later updates or content that was added post-launch. Mostly because I'm also going to be discussing the overall reception of the game upon its release, and the impact it had on Slenderman's legacy. And I don't feel like any updates added after all of that are relevant to that discussion. So yeah, I felt like that was important to mention before going into this. I do actually plan on making a video after this about the Arrival as a whole, including all of its updates and post-launch content, because I do have a lot to say about that, but for this video, I'll be discussing the original release version of the game only. Alright, with that said, here we go. In the game, you play as a woman called Lauren, who's about to go visit her best friend Kate. Kate unfortunately lost her mother recently, and because of that has now inherited her childhood home. She has decided that she wants to sell it, and has asked Lauren for help with selling the house and packing things up. When Lauren arrives at the house, however, she finds the place completely trashed, and Kate nowhere to be found. Upon investigating further, she discovers that Kate's entire bedroom is covered with pages full of insane ramblings and multiple drawings of a strange and mysterious tall figure who appears to have been stalking Kate. Spoiler alert! It was the Slender Man. Yeah, I bet you didn't see that one coming, did you? Lauren then hears a scream coming from the woods, and thinking it might be Kate's, she decides to head into the woods to try and find her friend. Throughout the course of the game, she eventually starts to get hunted by Slenderman herself, along with some other strange creature wearing a hoodie and a mask, who appears to be aiding him. Eventually, Lauren gets led into a trap and gets knocked unconscious. When she wakes up, she finds herself in the basement of an old burned down house. After making her way upstairs, she finally finds her friend Kate, who's quietly sobbing in a dark corner of the house. When Lauren approaches her, she suddenly transforms into the masked creature that was trying to hunt her down earlier, and attacks Lauren, revealing that this creature was Kate all along, and that she has been turned into one of Slenderman's proxies. The game then ends with a cutscene of Lauren being dragged away, presumably either having been killed, or also about to be turned into another proxy for the Slenderman. And that's a very summed up version of Slender the Arrival's story. Personally, I think the story is fine for what the game is, and I especially like how it doesn't go into Slenderman's backstory at all, or try to explain his motives or anything like that. That way, Slenderman remains this mysterious and unpredictable entity whose motives are completely unknown to anyone but himself, and I believe Slenderman works best that way. There have been a few attempts over the years to give Slenderman a backstory, and it just never really seems to work for one reason or another. The most notorious attempt is probably the one from a fan game called Haunted Memories, in which Slenderman was once a man named Mark Slender, which is already a little on the nose if you ask me, who was burned alive inside of a bunker by German soldiers during World War II, which then somehow caused him to become the Slenderman, which is of course just dumb and no one liked that, so I appreciate the fact that they didn't try to do anything similar in Slender the Arrival. Another thing about the game I really liked was the atmosphere. It's easily the game's strongest point in my opinion. One of my favorite things about the game is that while playing, you'll often hear stuff like footsteps or things rustling in bushes behind or next to you, even though there's absolutely nothing there when you look.
Fuck off!
It does a really good job at keeping you tense and never making you feel safe, which I absolutely love. But that also brings me right into what is probably my biggest personal grievance with this game. And that's that to me, it often feels like the game actively tries to take you out of its immersion as much as it possibly can. And one of the biggest ways it unfortunately manages to do that for me is through the game's use of collectibles.
Come on now, dog. Come on, man.
See, Slender the Arrival doesn't actually tell you its story straight up, but instead does so through a bunch of collectibles that are scattered throughout the game. These collectibles are things like letters and emails and newspaper clippings and stuff like that, and most of them make little to no sense whatsoever just by themselves. But if you take all of them and put them into context of one another, you'll be able to piece together the backstory of what happened prior to Lauren arriving at Kate's house, which is where the game starts. And with that added context, you're then able to understand what's going on throughout the events of the actual game itself. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, the problem is that most people don't give a shit about collectibles. And because collecting them all is pretty much a requirement if you want to understand literally anything that happens in the game, most people, including myself when I first played it back in the day, will have absolutely zero clue what is even happening throughout the entirety of the game. It just puts you in a bunch of random scenarios, refuses to elaborate on any of them, and before you know it, the game's over. It doesn't even tell you something as basic as who it is that you're playing as, or whose house it is that you're visiting at the beginning of the game. You can only learn that through these collectibles. Now, to go back to my original point, why does this ruin the immersion of the game? Well, because you're practically forced to stop playing it every time you enter a new area, and either start roaming around aimlessly looking for these things, or exit the game and pull up a guide on like YouTube or something. And while that mysterious way of storytelling may work for a game like Five Nights at Freddy's, for example, where the story is more of a secondary bonus thing and not really the main focus of the game, for a game that has an actual dedicated story mode like Slender the Arrival has, that just doesn't work. Because what's the point of playing through a game's story mode if it's not even going to tell you the actual story? What I think it should have done instead was the same thing that Slendytubbies 3 did for its story mode. And before anyone asks, yes, I am about to unironically use a Slendytubby game as an example to criticize a game made by an actual professional game studio. Deal with it. Slendytubbies 3 opens up with a small bit of text that in only a few sentences sets up the game's world and gives you just enough lore information for you to understand the scenario you're about to be put in and play through. And then it keeps doing that at the beginning of every chapter. If The Arrival did something similar to that and only included extra details about the story and its collectibles for those who wanted to find out more about the game's lore, like most games do, I wouldn't have a problem with any of it. But unfortunately, it didn't do that, and that makes me sad. Some other big points of criticism the game received were that it was too short, which I'd say is fair. On average, it only takes about 90 minutes to play through the story mode, and there's even an achievement you can unlock if you manage to beat the game in only 45 minutes, which I don't know if that's an achievement, man. That's just kinda sad. Another big one was that the game was very repetitive, which, yeah, I'd say is also fair. It didn't really do much to expand on the gameplay ideas of the original Slender the 8 pages, and a lot of its sections boiled down to really nothing more than some kind of variation to find all the pages. Turn on all generators, close all the windows, or just literally find 8 pages. Twice. And when your game is only about 90 minutes long, having like 5 sections of what are basically just variations of the exact same gameplay idea can definitely make it feel repetitive. Now, to be fair to the game, it was sold for only $10 and was made in only 9 months' time, so I'd say it was very fairly priced for what you ended up getting. But that doesn't change the fact that a lot of people, myself included, were just expecting a little more. This was, after all, a game made by an actual game studio and had some pretty high expectations to meet after the phenomenon that was Slender the 8 pages. And whether it was fair or not in retrospect, a lot of people were just left a little disappointed after playing it.
He's just standing there, menacingly.
So yeah, like I said at the beginning of this segment, Slender the Arrival definitely has its fair share of flaws. But I also said that there were some other factors as to why this game didn't reach the same amount of popularity as Slender the 8 pages did. Factors that were completely out of the developer's control. And the biggest one of these is simply the fact that by the time The Arrival released, most people were just tired of seeing Slender Man everywhere.
It's time to stop!
I'm absolutely certain that the game's developers worked their asses off to get the game out in only 9 months' time. But as has always been the case with most things, when something becomes popular as quickly as Slender did, it usually loses that popularity again just as fast as it was gained. And unfortunately for the developers, a lot of people had already moved on to the next big thing by the time the game dropped. And while there were more than enough people who were still interested in the Slender Man, and the game wasn't a financial failure by any means, I'm sure it wasn't as successful as the developers had hoped coming off the success of the 8 pages. I also feel that the insane growth of the entire Let's Play genre on YouTube during this time created a new type of audience that just wanted to watch their favorite YouTuber play scary games that they otherwise never would have played, let alone bought themselves. They were never going to actually buy a game like The Arrival. They just wanted to see a PewDiePie or a Markiplier get scared while playing it. They were interested in the YouTuber they watched, but that didn't always mean that they were also interested in the games they played, which often resulted in interest in a game seeming much larger than it actually was. And on top of that, Slender the 8 pages was completely free, whereas Slender the Arrival cost $10, which automatically meant that the player base was going to be much smaller because of that. I genuinely believe that if Slender the 8 pages had cost $5, it never would have reached the hype that it did now that it was free.
Yes! 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 No! Fuck!
But whatever the reasons may be, the game received very mixed reviews from both fans and critics alike, with some absolutely loving it and others absolutely hating it. I personally fall somewhere in the middle. I definitely don't hate the game. I think there are a lot of things it does really well, and it's easily the best Slender game out there. And since it was sold for only $10, I feel like I can't really complain too much. But to be completely honest, I'm not exactly a fan either. I had hoped that replaying the game for this video all these years later would change my opinion on it, but even after doing so, I just can't help but feel a little disappointed. I think that the game just could have been so much more than what it eventually ended up being. Also, in case any of you watching weren't aware yet, last year the game received a free update for its 10th anniversary, where they pretty much remade the entire game and gave it a complete visual overhaul. And I believe they're even planning to add a multiplayer mode and mod tools to the game that allow you to create your own custom levels. So if you feel the urge to go back and replay The Arrival after this, then I'd say now is a better time than ever. Unfortunately though, as genuinely awesome as these updates are, it's not going to change how the game was received back when it first came out. As for most people, when they think of Slender Man, they think of the 8 pages, and not The Arrival, and that really should have been the other way around. Ultimately, people were quickly starting to lose interest in Slender Man, and while the game definitely was a financial success, it failed to revive overall public interest in the Slender Man character, who continued to lose popularity by the day. While he definitely still had his fair share of fans, his decreasing popularity over the years that followed really meant the beginning of the end for the character. Then, on May 31st, 2014, something happened that, to this very day, I still can't believe actually happened in real life. Honestly, when I first read about this, I thought it was a joke or meant to be satire or something, but unfortunately, it was very real. On May 31st, 2014, in Waukesha, Wisconsin, two 12-year-old girls, Morgan and Anissa, lured their friend Peyton into the woods after a sleepover, stabbed her 19 times, and left her there. Peyton, who was also only 12 at the time, managed to crawl to a nearby road, where she was found by a passing cyclist, who immediately contacted emergency services. Luckily, both attackers were quickly arrested, and Peyton managed to make a full recovery. Now, those of you who have never heard this story before might be thinking, what does this have to do with Slender Man? Well, during police questioning, the two girls said that they didn't actually want to kill Peyton, but believed they had to in order to save them and their families from getting killed by the Slender Man. Yes, I'm not kidding.
There's this website called the Creepypasta Wiki.
Okay.
It's full of like horror stories that are meant to purposely scare you, and there's one of them called Slender Man.
Because they believed that they and their families were being targeted by the Slender Man, their plan was to offer themselves up to him to become his proxies, which they hoped in turn would cause Slender Man to leave their families alone. But before they could do that, they had to prove themselves worthy first, which is why they tried to kill Peyton, or Bella as they nicknamed her.
He has these proxies, or servants, as people call them. Morgan said, "Hey, Anissa, we should be proxies." I was like, "Okay, how would we do that?" She said, "We have to kill Bella, because we had to supposedly prove ourselves worthy to Slender."
Like I said, when I first heard about this, I thought it was supposed to be something satirical, just because of the sheer ridiculousness of it all. But unfortunately, it was very real, and incredibly tragic. Understandably so, this story made international news, but what a lot of media really wanted to focus on wasn't necessarily the case itself, but more so this mysterious Slender Man, and how dangerous he supposedly was.
The motive, say police, to win the favor of a fictional internet horror character called Slenderman, who the girls found on the horror fantasy website creepypasta.wikia.com.
And due to many people now learning about Slenderman, and by extension creepypastas in general, for the first time through the horrible and frankly dishonest way they were being portrayed on the news, public perception of Slenderman quickly turned from him being a silly internet meme to him now being the symbol of some strange online cult with the ability to turn your kids into murderers, which caused many concerned parents to start mass monitoring their kids' online activity to make sure that they stayed away from these oh so dangerous creepypastas. The Creepypasta wiki in particular, which was mentioned multiple times during the girls' police questionings, started receiving heavy criticism from people who claimed that the site was responsible for publishing and spreading the information that caused these girls to become obsessed with the Slenderman, and that it was therefore at least partially responsible for what happened to Peyton. And many people even blamed the site directly for the incident and wanted the entire website banned altogether. This got so out of hand that the Creepypasta wiki eventually had to issue a public statement in which they said, all of the works presented on this wiki and other sites, including works like Slenderman, Jeff the Killer, Ben Drowned, Sonic.exe, etc., are fictional stories and characters.
Well, duh.
Now, I'm not going to read the full statement, but I will put it on screen, so if you want to, you can pause the video here and read the full thing yourself. But they ended off by saying, there is a line between fiction and reality, and it is up to you to realize where that line is. We are a literature site, not a crazy satanic cult. Honestly, the fact that this even needed to be said and that all of this actually happened in real life over a creepypasta character of all things is still to this day just absolutely insane to me. However, due to all of this, creepypastas in general were now kind of seen as something evil by the general public. And if you brought up the topic of creepypastas around other people, they'd often directly associate it with this incident and get uncomfortable. Creepypastas kind of became a taboo topic, especially Slenderman. I mean, people started treating him like freaking Voldemort. We do not speak his name. Like, if people heard you talking about Slenderman, they'd look at you as if they just overheard you saying that you invited Bill Cosby to your kid's birthday party. It was absolutely ridiculous. But as with any nationwide moral panic and controversy like this, most people eventually forgot about creepypastas again and moved on to the next thing. But unfortunately for Slenderman, the damage was already done, and his name would forever be associated with this tragic incident. Many projects involving the Slenderman character were cancelled after this in fear of receiving backlash, and it kind of meant the end for the character. However, many fans still remained a little sliver of hope that one day, people would just forget about this whole thing, and new Slenderman related media would start to come out again. And they were right, unfortunately. On August 10th, 2018, Sony released a movie about Slenderman, simply titled Slender Man. And it was a complete disaster. So sorry in advance to all the 3 people watching who actually like this movie, but I'm just letting you know, I'm not one of you. Everything about this movie just sucks. The writing and dialogue.
Top secret.
Oh, I see. A circle jerk?
The CGI.
Yikes.
The editing, it's just no bueno. Well, let's start by briefly going over the plot first. There's this group of 4 teenage girls who are best friends. One night, they're hanging out together, watching porn as teenagers obviously do whenever they hang out.
Do you think she likes that? Oh my god!
Until one of them brings up the Slender Man, a mysterious mythical creature that makes people disappear. They try to find some info about him online and eventually stumble upon a forum website that contains a link to a video that supposedly summons the Slender Man. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember being able to summon him was ever established to be a thing anywhere prior to this movie. I mean, who does he think he is anyway? A Bloody Mary or something? Get out of here, man. The video instructs them to close their eyes once they hear a bell ring, and only to reopen them once they hear a third bell ring. The video starts off with a couple of random shots of a dark forest, then a bell rings, they close their eyes, then there are some more shots of a forest which are actually kind of pointless when you think about it because you're supposed to have your eyes closed anyway at that moment, before eventually a third bell rings. And when the girls open their eyes again, Slenderman himself makes a brief second cameo in the video before it cuts to a seizure-inducing edit of flashing images that would feel right at home in an EXE game. And most of these images don't really seem to have anything to do with Slenderman whatsoever. But like the Illuminati logo, for example, I mean, why is that even in here? It feels like they were trying way too hard to be edgy in this movie. I mean, you might as well have just put the Jeff the Killer image or like Smile Dog or something in there for good measure. Anyway, then the video ends and they're all just sitting there speechless and confused about what they just watched. But the girls weren't the only ones who were confused at that point, because so was I. This Slenderman summoning video is brought up a couple more times after this, and throughout the entire movie I just couldn't help but think, who filmed this? Who? I mean, Slenderman himself makes an actual physical appearance in the video, right? So, did he film this himself? Like, did he have a tripod or a selfie stick or something to film this with? Or did he hire someone to make him a promo video? I'm genuinely confused here. It makes no sense. Anyway, the rest of the film then follows these 4 girls as they slowly start to go insane and become obsessed with the Slender Man, until he eventually starts picking them off one by one and takes them. Or at least he takes 3 of them, and the other one he turns into zombie Michael Jackson from the Thriller music video. Also, like I said, this movie has some of the worst CGI I've ever seen in a horror movie. There's this one scene where one of the girls is making out with her crush on the couch, and then she starts hallucinating, and the guy's face becomes all distorted and twisted. I genuinely can't believe that this scene made it into the final cut of the movie. It's actually that bad. There are also a whole bunch of scenes that are just edited in a weird way and don't really seem to make any sense. The Slenderman summoning video again is a perfect example of that, where a scene is just filled with random and completely unrelated imagery that seems to just be there to try and make it edgy. There's another scene where one of the girls is having some kind of vision in her head and it shows this. I mean, what even is this? This scene looks like one of those edgy video art projects people claim to have found on the deep web. But my absolute favorite scene in the entire movie has to be the one where Slenderman turns into a giant-ass spider and starts chasing one of the girls. I don't know where that was ever stated to be one of his abilities, but that's pretty fucking cool, man. He should really do that more often. Something I did like about the movie was how it showed the original Slenderman image from Victor Surge when the girls were looking for evidence of the Slenderman. That was a cool Easter egg I spotted. Also, throughout the entire movie, you can hear a bell whenever Slenderman shows up.
Do you hear that?
And while I really don't think it was intentional, it kind of reminded me of the ambience music from Slenderman Shadow after you've collected a couple of pages. Again, I highly doubt that was intentional, but I'll give it a free point just for that reason. Overall, the movie was a giant flop and really killed any possible hope that still remained of the Slenderman character ever making a comeback. It was met with terrible reviews from both fans and critics alike, with a reviewer by the name of Carly Velacci beautifully describing the film as a nail in the coffin of a dying fandom, and my personal favorite one being from David Ehrlich, who in his review said, Slenderman aspires to be for the YouTube generation what The Ring was for the VHS generation, but there's one fundamental difference that sets these two movies apart, and that's that The Ring was good, and Slenderman is terrible. And I honestly have nothing to add to that. Slenderman completely faded from the public conscience after this movie was released, and unfortunately still, to this very day, has never been able to recover. Slenderman without a doubt has one of the most interesting backstories of any internet horror character ever. While characters like Freddy Fazbear, or pretty much any creepypasta character in history, were always designed and written with the intent and hope that they would one day become popular online, Slenderman was created for a simple Photoshop competition for a fairly niche group of people. He was never created with the intent to become the viral sensation that he did. It just kind of happened by accident, which makes his story extra special. But that only makes it even more unfortunate that his story has such an incredibly sad ending. The impact that Slenderman had on internet culture and indie horror gaming cannot be overstated, but despite his viral success, people never really seemed to be able to figure out what to do with the character and where to take him next. He never really evolved much as a character after he initially became popular, and his games especially always seem to boil down to the same few gameplay ideas. There have been some genuine attempts over the years, but not a single project involving the Slenderman character has ever been able to reach the same viral success as Slender the 8 Pages did all the way back in 2012. People seem to just kind of be tired of the character after they were done turning him into a giant meme. And that, followed up by a real-life crime committed in his name that turned him into a taboo topic amongst the general public, and then a terrible movie release a few years after that which killed any possible interest anyone still might have had left in the character, are the exact reasons for why Slenderman faded into irrelevancy. Hey, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, then thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then you might enjoy some of my other videos as well, so be sure to check them out here. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already for more content like this in the future, and hopefully, I will see you guys in a future video. But for now, I'm out. Later, people.